We have people from countries that are directly involved in talks with North Korea, and from a country that pays close attention to the region. I'd like to go in a little bit different order than is listed in the program. I had the devilish idea of asking speakers in reverse order to those who accepted the invitation. But that would put an onus on those who accepted last. And I only know the one who accepted first, which was Tom Countryman. So I'm going to ask him to go last. And I'm going to ask others to go in the order listed, not because they were the last to respond, because I'm sure that's not the case. But we're going to have no more than 5 minutes of remarks from each of the opening panelists, and then we'll have some discussion. It won't be question, answer, it'll be question, comment, and then if anybody from the panel wants to comment, they have the chance. Otherwise, at the end, I'll give them each a chance. So starting off, Brigadier General Lee Sang-chul, who's the Director General of the Arms Verification Agency in the Republic of Korea Ministry of National Defense. General Lee has been dealing with North Korea for many years. For 20 years, he was involved in North-South military talks in his position as the Director of the Arms Control Division of the National Defense Ministry. He'll be followed by Dr. Justin Baez, the Director of the Policy Planning Staff of the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Development. He's a scholar diplomat, historian of international relations and the United States. I saw in his bio that he's coming out with a bio of Jimmy Carter's National Security Advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who I think was instrumental in persuading Jimmy Carter not to withdraw troops from South Korea back then. Dr. Alexander Dinkin, the Director of the Institute of World Economy and International Relations of the Russian Academy of Sciences, will follow. He's a professor of economics and academic secretary of the Russian Academy of Sciences Division for Global Problems in International Relations. And then lastly, Tom Countryman, who is Assistant Secretary of State for International Security and Non-Proliferation since September 2011. Somebody sent me his bio, and I was looking for something in it that directly related to Korea. And 32 years in the State Department, I'm sure he's dealt with Korea in various guises, but the bio had experience in the Middle East and Egypt, Arabic training and so forth. But then I saw that you were once the foreign policy advisor to the Commandant of the U.S. Marine Corps. And I thought, there's a Korean connection for sure. So let's go. General Lee, you have the floor for the opening comments.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm very pleased to discuss about North Korea and regional security with senior officers and civilian experts. Now I'll brief my opinion. The strategic environment of Asia-Pacific region, where both cooperation and conflict coexist among major countries recently, is very fluid and unstable. Especially North Korea's political economic instability and the nuclear missile threat act as major factors towards the situation of unrest in the Asia-Pacific region. North Korea is currently solidifying Kim Jong-un's monolithic system dictatorship through replacement with a close group of aides. Kim has seized power elite of the part government military and has strengthened the system of control against the military authorities. In order to secure support from the people, North Korea seeks to build its economy focused on light industry and agriculture to overcome its chronic economic woes and food shortage. Human rights situation has been severely worsened through strengthened political censorship and ideological control, political prison camp, and public execution. It is. In order to prevent the proliferation of outside information and weakening the regime. North Korea has a large amount of plutonium, has operated its uranium enrichment program, and has improved the yield and miniaturization technology through 3 nuclear tests. Currently, North Korea is maintaining the status in which an additional nuclear test and ballistic missile test launch are possible, as long as the political decision is made. As North Korea adheres to the parallel line that promotes both nuclear force and economic development, and as it makes its nuclear power as a fait accompli, North Korea is proceeding with the sophistication of its nuclear capability through nuclear test and ballistic missile test launch. Meanwhile, North Korea has also carried out disguised peace offensive to ease sanctions on North Korea and to secure aid to North Korea. North Korea's development, possession of a nuclear weapon and ballistic missile are not only direction violation of UN Security Council resolution and international non-proliferation regime, but also are provocation actions that cause the situation of unrest through arms race in the Asia-Pacific region and the proliferation of WMD. North Korea recently expressed a hardline position as it condemned against the annual ROK-US combined training and threatened to conduct nuclear tests. We evaluate such actions as deception tactics in order to evade the point of North Korean nuclear issue and to attain nuclear possession as a fait accompli. Also, we anticipate that North Korean regime's political instability and economic vulnerability will result in serious situations such as mass North Korean defectors, possibility of sudden change and collapse, human rights violation and humanitarian issues. North Korea's nuclear missile and regime instability have been acting as the greatest factors that threaten peace in the Korean Peninsula and stability in the Asia-Pacific region. North Korean regime's future that does not abandon its nuclear missile and that does not proceed with reform and opening its politics economy is a huge threat with risk and explosiveness that can disturb the secret order of the Asia-Pacific region. Our Park-geun administration has been pushing ahead with the trust-building process on Korean Peninsula and the Dresden Initiative in order to deter North Korea's military provocation and to develop inter-Korean relationship. In order to achieve peace and stability in the Asia-Pacific region, the international community also should induce North Korea to proceed with proper direction. We view that in order to achieve this, close cooperation and mutual assistance necessary. It's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director General. You got to the point and you did it exactly in 5 minutes, a good model for everyone. Justin Raiz, please.
Thanks. In order to try to take Mr. Lee as a model for keeping time, I'll limit myself to 3 main statements. The first one is that DPRK is not only a problem for regional security, but also for global security. The title of the panel is Implications for Regional Security, but I'd like to show why us Europeans and us French in particular worry about North Korea a great deal and are very concerned by the recent developments. Of course, we do take our regional obligations seriously. We do consider the fate of South Korea first, Japan, and other countries that might be threatened by North Korea. France is still part of the UN Command and the Military Armistice Commission. It was part of the KEDO in 1990s. Obviously, it was not part of the six-party talks, but has remained very much concerned and involved in these issues. But the point I want to make is that we see an increasingly global threat emanating from the DPRK because of the longer and longer range of North Korean missiles that threaten friends and allies as well. Take Guam, for example, and we are linked with the US by Article 5 of NATO, which would oblige us to a response in case the US was attacked. Second reason, and most importantly, proliferation. We saw what happened with Syria. We know that North Korea is selling a lot of different types of weapons, including the worst possible ones, nuclear weapons, but or nuclear material at least, but also small weapons, including to Africa. And three, because of the threat to the global non-proliferation regime, and as a member of the P5, we are of course very concerned with this. The second statement is that the North Korean problem is not contained, it is growing. 20 years ago, so in 1994, the first nuclear crisis on the peninsula, few people thought that North Korea would last for very long. There was a famine, North Korea was losing its allies, etc. But, the fact is, it's still here. It's still here. And it has nukes, and it has missiles, and it has been modernizing both, and it will never turn back the clock. It will never turn back the clock, first because it is now a growing part of the North Korean state revenues, the sale of weapons, including nuclear material, estimated to up to 1/3 of state revenues, because it is written now in the constitution, and because, of course, North Korea has the examples of Iraq, Libya, and now more recently Ukraine, that, you better keep your nuclear weapons if you don't want to be attacked, or if you don't want to see a part of your territory annexed by another one. It's safer to keep your nuclear weapons rather than exchange it for an agreement that might not be respected. I think we may have an impression of containment, but it's an illusion because of the modernization of the North Korean arsenal, because of proliferation, which I just mentioned, and also because of the erratic behavior of Pyongyang, and so the issue is getting more intractable and dangerous, and so unfortunately the best we can hope for is to manage the problem rather than solving it, which leads me to my third and final point. I think there are three key words to managing the DPRK. One is China, the other is unity, and the third one is consistency. I think China, among the different players, has more keys to that problems than others. After all, almost 80% of North Korean trade is done with China, which of course gives it leverage. There's a history of links between the two regimes. There's probably a better knowledge, even if I always pictured the North Korean regime as opaque to everyone external to it, but still. And also it's a nuclear power neighbor and member of P5 country, and so China should do even more than it is doing now. And I'm taking the example of Iran, on the nuclear issue of Iran, on which China did play a constructive role, whether in 2010 with the UN resolution, or more recently in November with the interim agreement, and we hope in July by helping negotiate the final agreement with Iran. And so I think that gives us at least a partial template for dealing with North Korea. The key here, or the second key rather, is unity. Strong unity is required, especially if we're considering a new round of sanctions, especially if a new test is done in the next few months. Hopefully not, but many experts think that it will happen. And we should aim at curbing proliferation and then going for the rollback, even if if we don't have any illusion that we can roll back that program, that's what we should aim for. And so consistency is the last keyword, is the idea that the same way we dealt with Iran with a great deal of consistency, we should apply to North Korea, even if once again the odds are largely against us. But because of my second point that the problem is growing, I think that we have really no other realistic solution. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Justin, for, again, that precise enumeration of the issues. Your mention of China reminds me that although China is not on the panel, it's not by design, but by circumstance. I note that there are at least 5 delegates from China around the table, and I do expect that some of them will present a China perspective later. Dr. Alexander Dinkin, please.
Thank you. Well, I guess it's common knowledge and sad truth that decades-long efforts of international community to influence the nature of Pyongyang regime completely failed. And more than that, existing international institutions also failed to stop North Korean nuclear and missile programs. Why it happens? I guess because those two issues, the nature of regime and those military programs, is very difficult to separate. The nature of this totalitarian regime is that leadership must constantly demonstrate its legitimacy through shows of force. And this grandiose military display is the essence of both domestic and outside propaganda. The third nuclear test, announcing to the Korean public as well as to the outside world who is firmly in charge in town. And as it was before, North Korean nuclear and missile programs are the most important part of its national security, economic, and even foreign policy. Also, I guess that Mr. Gaddafi fate and the whole Libyan story is a constant nightmare and a lesson for Pyongyang, which is learned very well. Several generations of Kim's family developed rather skillfully a strategy which let me call as a blackmail balance strategy. They constantly search the balance between heavy investments in military build-up in the frame of so-called military first policy and economic hardship close to hunger. When economic crisis worsens, North gave some promises and received assistance packages from abroad. Then they violate these promises and the whole cycle repeats once more. The clear and simple evidence of this attitude is opening and closing of the Kaesong industrial complex. In foreign relations, Pyongyang strongly believes in bilateral engagements with Seoul, Washington, Beijing, Tokyo, or Moscow. For example, the latest development, receiving in Sweden some ease from Tokyo special restrictions in exchange again for promises of comprehensive investigation of the kidnapped Japanese citizens. The situation of constant blackmail balance implemented by DPRK produced dangerous intentions of proliferation. Already last year, more than 2/3 of South Koreans, according to Chonsun Ilbo Daily, were in favor of the idea that Republic of Korea developed its own nuclear deterrent capabilities. This is alarming public opinion poll outcome, because if it happens, immediately Japan would step on this track, and clearly that both countries, Japan and Republic of Korea, have the technical capability to promptly create nuclear weapons. So what can be done to avoid this threatening proliferation scenario? In my perception, DPRK feels very uncomfortable when faces multilateral actions, such as UN Security Council resolutions. And I guess that we have one more platform, one more idle international institutions. I mean using six-party talks on North Korea nuclear program in order to initiate debate on security issues on Korean Peninsula in the format of the fifth group of these talks. I guess that would allow us to continue multilateral talks even if North Korea does not want to attend those meetings. One more instrument which we are elaborating in our institute is regular consultations and between Russia, China, and American security alliances with Japan and the Republic of Korea. I guess these multilateral efforts could also put some heat on the regime in Pyongyang. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dinkin. I'm taken by your suggestion that the six-party talks could continue, even minus North Korea. Unlike Iran, 5+1, it would be the 6-1. You will have all realized that I saved the best for last because Tom Countryman's Bureau is intimately involved in the policy development and management of issues concerning North Korea. So, Tom, over to you.
I'll let you judge what's best. But thank you, Mark, for this invitation. I want to thank IISS for the opportunity to talk about one of the most serious threats, not just to Asian peace and security, but as our colleague already said, also a threat to the integrity globally of the non-proliferation regime. I'll share the United States perspective on North Korea and the tools that the international community has to tackle this growing challenge. Now, North Korea's challenge is decades old, but it has become more acute over the past few years. We see continued development of nuclear programs, including uranium enrichment, plutonium production, a third nuclear explosion. We've seen launches using ballistic missile technology, and we are subjected constantly to a crescendo of invective and threats in language that can only be described as sub-civilized, to conduct additional longer-range launches, new forms of nuclear tests, and aggression against its neighbors. And the DPRK continues to engage in proliferation of conventional weapons worldwide. All of this is in clear violation of United Nations Security Council decisions. These provocative developments are a serious and troubling escalation by North Korea. The United States remains fully committed to the defense of our allies, those most affected by this threat, in full coordination with them and with all the six-party partners. We continue to pursue a dual-track policy, engagement whenever possible, and pressure as necessary to make clear the choices North Korea faces. We are open to credible, meaningful multilateral negotiations to implement the 2005 joint statement and to bring North Korea into compliance with its United Nations obligations. But we are not interested in talking just for the sake of talks. We will not respond to irresponsible behavior with concessions or inducements. We will respond positively if North Korea demonstrates that it is serious about denuclearization. But we haven't yet seen any such indication, have not seen a serious commitment to complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization. The opposite has occurred. The regime has elevated the pursuit of nuclear weapons technology to the level of a national priority. We have no illusion that North Korea will voluntarily end its pursuit of nuclear weapons. And that is why, even as we keep alive the prospect for a negotiated resolution, enhanced pressure remains critical to compelling Pyongyang to correct course and to choose denuclearization rather than continuing to choose instability, isolation, and poverty. The success of this approach depends in a very large part on coordinated efforts with our the Republic of Korea, Japan, Russia are all important partners. But China has a unique historic, diplomatic, and economic ties with North Korea and the greatest capacity to shape North Korea's choices. President Obama and President Xi made a commitment that we will deepen our bilateral engagement on North Korea and on non-proliferation writ large. As a neighboring country with a strong economy, China is the first line of defense against North Korea's non-proliferation activities. Beijing and Washington have worked together well to adopt strong UN Security Council resolutions. China has taken major steps to implement more completely the United Nations sanctions regimes concerning North Korea as well as Iran. Despite these positive developments, Iran and North Korea continue to rely on China's economy as the primary source of supply for the high technology and materials needed for their prescribed programs. China can do more to prevent such exports, and the U.S. will continue to work cooperatively with Beijing to that end. But I want to emphasize that the threat posed by North Korea is not just a threat to South Korea or Japan or China or the United States. The responsibility to deny to North Korea the technical and financial resources it needs to build such weapons is a responsibility not just of the United States or China or other states. It is a responsibility that extends beyond China, beyond the U.S., beyond the five parties. It is a responsibility shared by the entire international community, including the rapidly growing economies of Southeast Asia, which must face this issue with equal dedication. North Korea's global efforts to export conventional weapons amounts to the export of instability to other regions. And the export of conventional weapons also provides North Korea with a critical source of hard currency for its weapons of mass destruction programs. This is why the UN Security Council has explicitly forbidden not only the import of WMD material to North Korea, but also the export of conventional weapons. The UN panel of experts has documented several times North Korea's use of ever more sophisticated techniques to conceal proliferation and to evade sanctions. These practices often make states unwitting participants in North Korea's proliferation, exposing other countries and their territories to, and their financial and commercial and transportation sectors to exploitation and abuse. Now, closing and constricting all avenues of proliferation to and from North Korea, as well as Iran and Syria, places a special responsibility on the major supplier and transshipment states. This responsibility means, first, a firm and proactive commitment to implementation of the UN decisions. Secondly, an effective export control system to support and facilitate enforcement. And third, strict vigilance and the will to act within the letter and spirit of those resolutions. This is hard work. The U.S. works very hard with our Asia-Pacific partners, with ASEAN, with individual states, to build counter-proliferation capacity and to build political will. We participate in several programs that strengthen the export control infrastructure in Asia. The Proliferation Security Initiative is one example. 104 countries have now endorsed the PSI, and just within the last year, Thailand, Malaysia, and Vietnam have done the same. We admire states like Singapore and Malaysia, who have done so much to pass and implement meaningful legislation on strategic trade control. And we meet our other non-proliferation responsibilities to our Asian partners. We hope that in the near future, the P5 states will sign the protocol to the Southeast Asia Nuclear Weapon-Free Zone Treaty, which provides assurances to states in the region against the use or threat of use of nuclear weapons. This wide-ranging approach is necessary because the DPRK's nuclear challenge is not a bilateral issue, it's not a six-party issue, it's not a regional issue, it is a global issue. The entire world needs to speak with one voice to make clear we will not accept North Korea as a nuclear-armed state. North Korea cannot pursue nuclear weapons, cannot export conventional weapons without cost to itself, and any further provocations by the North will come only with a very heavy cost to the North. We hope all states will join the growing international effort to shine a light on the massive human rights abuses within North Korea. We believe strongly that bringing North Korea into compliance with its own obligations and commitments will require a comprehensive, concerted, and collective effort, not by one country or two or five, but by all states that have a stake in peace and security in Asia and beyond. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Tom. That was very good. Now, I'm sorry that we don't have the fancy technology of putting your badge into a microphone, so we'll do it the old-fashioned way of putting placards vertically. And I see Aidan Foster Carter and then Dr. Shirk. Aidan, please.
Thank you very much to all of us. Thank you very much indeed to all of the panel. I just want to toss out a few additional points very, very briefly, really, to most of them to everybody. First of all, what difference does the panel think the arrival of Kim Jong-un has made? We often stress the continuity of North Korea. I think he's made a difference. I think there is actually a new unpredictability, as if we didn't have enough already. The rhetoric we saw last year and the rhetoric this. And usually with Kim Jong-il, it was fairly clear what he wanted eventually. It might have been something outrageous. It's not at all clear to me, in general, what Kim Jong-un's game plan is, except, of course, very interestingly now with Japan. If I'm allowed to say, I see Mr. Funabashi is here. I would love to hear his view on what is, whether he thinks that Abe-san will succeed where Koizumi-san, about which he wrote very brilliantly, failed. That's one thing. Another thing, how do we prioritize the North Korean bads? There are about 10 of them. You all know what they are, and I'm not going to list them. We were reminded about the human rights issue graphically by the report this year, but will it always go on the back burner? Will nukes always be number one, etc., etc.? Thirdly, will somebody please tell me the source of a quote, which I wish I'd made up, but I didn't, and whether it's right. Who was it who said that North Korea, the problem with North Korea, is it's always right at the top of the bottom of the US president's in tray, or possibly of Barack Obama's in tray. The point is more general. I wish I'd thought of that line. I think it's true. Other things are happening in the world. The western arc of Asia has kept people pretty busy. I understand strategic patience. It does look a lot like doing nothing, I'm sorry to say. And finally, can I plead as a mere humble citizen on the issue of contingency plans, which have been much in the news? I don't expect you to tell me, but Victor Jha has made this point for a long time, and I don't always agree with Victor. I agree on this. The US and the ROK have one set of plans. The People's Republic of China, we have reason to believe, has another set of plans. I just want to be reassured that you guys are coordinating, and indeed I don't mean to rule out Russia, other neighboring states, and Japan as well. Nothing could be worse. Well, a North Korean collapse would be dangerous, but anyway, a collapse which, because of inattention and lack of preparation and lack of coordination, led to a superpower confrontation. I don't even want to think about it. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Aidan. To interpret to everyone one of the things you said, when you said how to prioritize North Korean bads, I heard you say badge, and I'm thinking 10 different kinds of badges, but I got it. It's bad things, right? Yes, got it.
It's American.
Well, I have a couple of comments and then a question that I hope will draw our Chinese friends out to talk about current Chinese perspective on North Korea. My impression from informal discussion with Chinese friends is that there is a Chinese views of North Korean policy and of the entire regime are at an all-time low, and that the public as well as the elite are really very fed up with Pyongyang. And I just wonder what it will take for China to divorce North Korea. Will a fourth nuclear test do it? Will more revelations about internal terror and violence or anything like that do it? So I really want to hear from Professor Jin and others about what their views are. And a related question to Tom Countryman, I thought I heard you say something about the DPRK relying on China for the high technology for its programs. Did you say that? And I know that, of course, DPRK is economically dependent on its relationship with China. That's its lifeline for pretty much all of its foreign trade that enables it to survive at a fairly low level, but still survive economically. But I wasn't aware of the fact that we thought that China was assisting DPRK nuclear program with technology. Is that what you said? Okay. I just heard it wrong? Okay, good.
We've got two Chinese on the list, so we'll get to them in a minute. But first we'll go to Bob James and then Mr. Mine.
It's not on. No. Does South Korea have a plan for salvaging or absorbing North Korea if North Korea collapses either internally or because of some kind of conflict? West Germany did have such a plan. It was difficult and expensive as hell, but it sort of worked. And is China likely to object in some way, militarily, I guess, if China sees South Korea doubling its size and power over a decade or so as it takes over North Korea? They would then have probably Japan and Korea to be fourth and fifth largest economic countries right next door to them, and all of them allied to the United States in some way. Would China do something?
Thank you, Bob. Mr. Mine?
Thank you. One difficulty is that we have to make reasonable argument to discuss the unreasonable facts in and around North Korea. I would like to, having said this, I would like to make just a few comments, a couple of comments. One is the China's role. I heard from a few people on the podium that we still have good reason to expect China to play a bigger role in the persuading North Korea to come back to more reasonable lines. But I think it is always true that China may have somewhat adjusted the way they deal with North Korea about a year ago, and that's quite right. But at the same time, I would like to point out the role of the United States, because I think for North Koreans, the biggest expectation is directed towards the United States. That unreasonable state has been consistent in saying that the biggest problem is the threat by the United States. You believe it or not, this is another question, but still there's a certain type of consistency. So now, the last year, October last year, in Tokyo, we had 2+2 with the United States. Japan had 2+2 meeting with the United States. And in the question and answer session, Secretary Kerry even mentioned that the United States is ready to consider or review the possibility of having a non-aggression pact with North Korea. This is a very important remark, but unfortunately, I think Kim Jong-un was a bit too busy, perhaps too busy with the Chan Son-taek or either with other things. But anyway, it just came out from the question and answer session. But I just hope that the United States would be prepared to come back to the position again sometime in the future, because I believe it helps a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I'd ask Dr. Xia Jiping, and after him, it'll be Dr. Wang.
Thank you, Chairman. I enjoy the full presentation. China has two major goals as to the Korean Peninsula. One is nuclear non-proliferation, is a nuclear weapon-free Korean Peninsula. The second is stability on the Korean Peninsula. Since Xi Jinping, Chinese leader Xi Jinping, took power, China has put the nuclear weapon-free Korean Peninsula as the top priority. And also China made great efforts try to persuade North Korea to follow China's example, to have some kind of reform and openness, but it's very difficult. And also recently, I think since the end of last year, China also has give some pressure on North Korea, including suspension of oil supply for several months, and also some food assistance to North Korea. And also, I think China make great efforts to prevent North Korea from having a new nuclear test. And also, I think China make it clear to North Korea, and even I think send very serious warnings to North Korea, asking North Korea not to have another nuclear test. And also, I think China has followed the UN Security Council resolution to have sanctions on North Korea. So I think China's role as to the North Korea to prevent North Korea from nuclear to having nuclear weapons, I think quite positive. But it's very difficult for China, and also I think although now international community, including China, now put quite a heavy pressure on North Korea. However, now Kim Jong-un now has North Korea already has a nuclear weapon capability, and also Kim Jong-un regard the nuclear weapons as most important pillars to support its regime. So now it's very difficult to ask to pressure North Korea to give up nuclear weapons. But I think if China, the United States, South Korea, and Russia, if we can make greater efforts, continue to have greater efforts, we can at least manage North Korea nuclear crisis, and also finally can resolve North Korea nuclear issue. Although it will take a very long time, and since Obama administration in office, Obama administration pursues a policy of strategic patience towards North Korea. Now I have a question for Mr. Countryman. So the United States readjust its policy towards North Korea or not? I mean, the United States have some revisions of its policy towards North Korea. To some extent, in what way? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Xia. In a blog post in Shangri-La Voices a couple of days ago, I gave credit to China for persuading North Korea not to test a nuclear weapon, and I've been expecting to be proven wrong any day, but I hope that you will continue to be right. Dr. Wang, you have the floor, and if in your answer you are able to answer the question posed by Bob James about whether China would object if South Korea doubles in size, that would be appreciated. Well, you don't have to, but you could.
I first raise the question and then to maybe try to. The question is, China probably the most country against nuclear weapon North Korea for two reasons. China is surrounded by nuclear weapons. Can you imagine we surrounded by so many nuclear weapons countries like from Russia, Japan, Korea, Iran, Pakistan, India, so many. So North Korea is a threat to nuclear. North Korea is a threat to China. Definitely, we are against this. And most importantly, the nuclear test conducted by North Korea is just 100 miles away from the Chinese northeastern provinces. So, what's the feeling of the Chinese? So we are definitely not support the nuclear weapons North Korea. But I had the chance to talk with the North Korea guys last summer in China Academy of Social Sciences. He raised two questions to me. Number one, it seems like Obama pivot back to Asia, but not pivot back to the Korean Peninsula. So the North Korean nuclear issue is not a top agenda for Obama administration. You are too busy to handle so many other challenges, not North Korea nuclear issues, which make the North Korea guys, to attract the attention to the missile tests or whatever, to attract your attention. So it's the eyes on US, not eyes on China. Even we have some leverage, but it's just more economic and for human rights of the survival of the regime. It's not just you say, I don't think can impact of the North Korea to give up the nuclear weapons. Secondly, he also raised the question. At the beginning, he said it's a denuclearization in the whole Korean Peninsula, including the South Korea, the nuclear weapons. But now you remove or departure the nuclear weapons from the South Korea, right? But then he raised another question. How about Okinawa? You have the Japan, U.S. airlines. They consider that Okinawa, you have the nuclear weapons or facilities, or has the, if you need, it's easy for you to departure nuclear weapons in Okinawa. This is a threat to North Korea. I don't know the real situation, so maybe American friends can explain in these two important excuses to convince North Korea back to the six-party talks. I think this is a very important question. I don't know the details. And a quick response to Susan Sheikh, you said we have a marriage with North Korea. You know, one man, one wife. We don't have so many wives. North Korea is not a marriage. We don't have the marriage with North Korea. Some Americans put forward so-called G2 marriage. It's a kind of new model of the major countries' relations. Maybe North Korea nuclear issue is a gift for our new marriage. Actually, we work very well after the Xi to cooperate and to solve this North Korea problem. So this is not like a marriage. It's the problem of.
Okay, so you didn't have a prenuptial agreement. There's no marriage. And Aidan, I think he answered your question. The person who coined that phrase was a North Korea guy about the issue at the bottom of the top of the bottom of the inbox. I'm going to ask Nick Beasley and then Dana Allen and Lieutenant Colonel Liu to speak. If anybody in the back benches wants to catch my attention, there is a microphone back there, so you're not shut out. And then I think we will then go back to the panel, but we'll see if anybody else wants to comment. So, Nick.
Thanks, Mark. I really wanted just to get the panel's views on, I guess, what you could call economic reform or the prospects of economic reform in North Korea. We've seen the experiment with the special economic zones begin to flourish, investment from China begin to occur, and I guess echoing the sort of remarks that Justin Baez pointed out, that North Korea looks a bit more robust now than it did a few years ago, and I think one of the foundations of that seems to be some kind of economic revitalisation. I mean, these things are all relative, but so I wonder what the panel's thoughts are about that, and particularly about the growth of the various special economic zones. Thanks.
Thank you, Nick. Dana?
Thanks, Mark. The idea of the concept of regime change as a solution to problems is not hugely fashionable anymore. But in the issue of survival of exactly a year ago, the normally mild-mannered Mark Fitzpatrick wrote, "North Korea's bellicose actions and statements since late 2012 reinforced the conclusion that in the long run there is only one happy ending to the long-running tragedy: unification of the Korean Peninsula as a democratic, free enterprise-based republic that would be free of nuclear weapons." And, you know, I can't formulate a question that actually invites serious comment on regime change as an immediate or even medium-term policy, but given the unanimity of dark pictures presented here, including, I might add, from our Russian colleague, intellectually, is there any other way to think of this problem being solved?
Thank you, Dana, and thank you for the shout-out. Lieutenant Colonel Liu.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, all the speakers here. Every time when we're talking about North Korea's nuclear problem, China is a key word, so it's very funny, and it's also my responsibility to give some response. It has been a quite difficult time for me to talk about the North Korea nuclear issue with the recent development and the declaration of DPRK's fourth nuclear test. I am very much concerned about the development of DPRK's nuclear program. However, talking about DPRK's nuclear problem or any proliferation problem, I have to emphasize that the nuclear problem is more security and military than technical in nature. I know that the international society is very forgetful and has no patience to trace back, so let's look into the future. I noticed that recent months, DPRK's government has kept trying to open a third country channel to create a negotiation platform in order to talk directly with U.S. And after the consolidation of Kim Jong-un's governance of its domestic stability, it is the first priority of its government to develop its economy. In this regard, DPRK needs a favorable international and a neighboring environment. To be practical, it's time to continue the negotiation effort for all parties concerned, because as some of you mentioned, the nuclear proliferation is not only a threat to the security stability of Asia, but also a threat to the world non-proliferation regime. And China has done more than the outside world now to persuade North Korea into resumption the denuclearization talks. But the influence of China is quite limited. I want to tell you why. Maybe some of the points has been forgotten by the international society. First, North Korea is a sovereignty state. Secondly, sanction means something but cannot be sustainable. Thirdly, China has exhausted all the possible resources to persuade North Korea into talking and will insist on that. My question, one short question goes to Mr. Countryman. If it's possible that Obama administration had the will and energy to handle with DPRK's nuclear problem with the positive development of Iran's nuclear negotiation. Thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Yu. I think we all heard you say that China has exhausted all the available options. Some might differ with that, but I think we'll go back to the panel now, and we'll go in. Oh, wait a minute. Before we do that, I see one other comment from Mr. Young. So, and then we'll go back to the panel.
Just one observation about what's going on here, what's being discussed here. My observation is about the security dilemma in Northeast Asia in terms of the U.S. stakes in this region and China's response. There is a growing consensus here in China that the U.S. pivot to Asia is actually based on the legacy of the Cold War, which came to an end in 1991. The U.S. deliberately, somehow, to keep the Korean Peninsula divided and China divided with the Taiwan Straits to justify its 70,000 forward military presence in Northeast Asia. And based on the tough rhetoric by Secretary Chuck Hagel this morning, it's actually a blunt warning against China's maritime claims. China will not only get closer to Russia by whatever means, but to perhaps keep the picture alive about the tensions of the nuclear-armed DPRK, period.
Okay, so one more important issue tabled. Tom, I think most the largest number of questions were posed to you, including can't you walk and chew gum at the same time?
Yeah, I got that.
You got that one? Okay. But why don't you take the time you need to address, including this last important one about isn't the policy all just a ruse?
And the very latest one on blunt rhetoric, deeply appreciated. Look, the most important thing I learned in all my years of education, I learned in second grade, which is if you speak to your teacher with the same tone of voice that she speaks to you, you will be punished. But sometimes I forget that anyway, and sometimes the United States uses blunt rhetoric, even with people who use blunt rhetoric with the United States, or with smaller neighbors as well. I'd rather have blunt discussions than middle-of-the-night military maneuvers. Now, let's try to take these points one at a time. Susan, you quoted me correctly the first time and incorrectly the second time. North Korea does obtain the majority of the material it needs from outside of North Korea for its weapons programs from the Chinese economy. Iran does obtain the majority of its technological requirements for missiles and nuclear weapons from Chinese companies. Those are both facts. That does not mean that the Chinese government is assisting either program. I did not say assisting. The Chinese government is constantly improving its ability to enforce its own laws and UN resolutions. But let's face it, China is the second biggest capitalist economy in the world, and there are a lot of firms that are eager to sell things. And that is where North Korean and Iranian procurement networks are very important, and where government efforts in the US, in China, but also in Singapore, Malaysia, in other countries, are necessary to prevent Iran and North Korea from acquiring such materials. But it is absolutely not a Chinese government policy of assisting those programs. Can the U.S. walk and chew gum at the same time? I mean, I find it fascinating that your advice is that North Korea must be the number one issue for the United States, but it cannot be the number one issue for China. It does seem a little bit further away from the United States than it does from China. The fact is the United States does not have the option of choosing one issue at a time. And the United States also does not have the option of not engaging on North Korea, and we also don't have a requirement to inform everybody what we are doing. The fact is, U.S. diplomacy is active on North Korea. It is especially active in what we judge to be the most productive channel, which is engagement with the People's Republic of China. We have the capability to speak to the North Koreans. We have a channel. We use it. But at the moment, on the central issue of North Korean provocations, we have no desire to engage in a discussion solely on North Korea's terms, which I think a number of people here have recommended today. I even heard the point of view that North Korea has been consistent, that it wants to address what it sees as the U.S. threat to North Korean security. Well, damn it, the U.S. is consistent. We want to talk about nuclear weapons. It is what China agrees is the primary issue. If we're not going to talk about that, we're not going to talk. That's a consistent policy. If we are going to talk about denuclearization, if North Korea can say that, we will have a productive discussion about denuclearization and about North Korea's security concerns. And we've been 100% clear about that. It is not U.S. unwillingness to listen to North Korea that is preventing discussion. It is North Korean unwillingness to admit that there is a history here, that there was a basis for our previous discussions, a basis that the North Koreans tore up and threw away and don't wish to return to. There won't be a problem in discussing what North Korea wants to discuss when they acknowledge that the purpose of the six-party talks is to discuss denuclearization. We do look to China to influence that. I cannot accept the idea that China has exhausted all of its options. I think China is a major power. President Obama and President Xi agreed that we are building a new type of relationship between major powers. It is the first topic that the U.S. and Chinese Foreign Minister and Secretary of State discuss when they talk to each other. To say that this major power has exhausted all of its options against one of the most pathetic countries on earth, I think is a selective understatement of China's real strengths. We work with China because China's diplomacy can be effective, because China can decide how rigorously it wants to enforce sanctions against luxury imports into North Korea. We work with China because our two presidents agreed this is one of our key areas together, because it tests the model of a new type of major power relationship. And we work with China because the Chinese attitude towards North Korea is evolving in what we consider to be a positive direction. And that is happening because the North Korean attitude of arrogance towards the entire world, including China, is evolving in a negative direction. Those are some very good reasons for continuing to work with China. I apparently have a higher opinion of Chinese capabilities than some folks in China do, because I do not believe that the options are anywhere near exhausted. I know there were other questions, but let me just stop there and give a chance to my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. That was pretty clear. That was very clear. Alexander, may I ask you to go next?
Well, I guess that among panelists there were agreement that international unity is helpful medicine for solving the issue. The second agreement was that China is a very important player in this regard. For example, we have only 17 kilometers border with North Korea, and Chinese border is much bigger. About unpredictability, this is your question, I guess, is growing unpredictability in comparison with what we have before, because in my perception, maybe I'm mistaken, before we have sort of, in a way, collective ruling. Today we have one-man show in this city, so unpredictability is growing. But I agree with Mr. Countryman that North Korea issue is wider than Korean Peninsula. This is a completely international issue. But I'm afraid that in current circumstances of not if divorce, but separation between US and China, this issue hardly could be managed.
Thank you, Alexander. Justin, if you could address any of the points that...
Yeah, there was no question directed at me, so I'll be very brief. I just wanted to say, perhaps to follow up on my neighbor's comments, that unity is key. I do believe that sanctions are a key tool here, and I don't see why they would not be sustainable. After all, sanctions are what made Iran get back to the table of negotiations last year. They are what influenced the outcome of the election of a year ago in Iran, and so I do believe they are indeed a useful and important tool. Now, of course, they cannot achieve everything, but given the other options, which is either to do nothing or to engage in kinetic operations, I certainly prefer to see that. There are a couple of other points, but I'll leave the floor now.
Okay. Thank you. And lastly, General Lee, I think you will be speaking in Korean, so if delegates who do not speak Korean wish to avail themselves of the headset, now would be a good time to do so.
I would like to make 3 points. First of all, many of you have talked about that what would be the priority in terms of North Korea's bad deed. And from ROK's point of view, among all of the North Korean bad deeds, it would be the nuclear development activities that are the most threatening. And that poses the most realistic and grave situation. So that really calls for urgency. And because North Korea, DPRK, has been claiming that their development activities due to their safe defense against the U.S. threat. And because of their development activities, DPRK is posing grave threat to the ROK, and also they have been pursuing more conventional weapons activity as well. So this really poses a very realistic threat to us, and this is a matter of significance to us. My second point being is regime change or a big shift in the DPRK. It is our opinion that we are of the same ancestor. However, that we have experienced division and also experienced the Korean War. So South Koreans also believe that we need to see the reunification of the peninsula. However, a sudden change, including a collapse, is a very dangerous option or situation for us as well, because it could cause serious disruption as well as a situation that would be out of control. So even if we do pursue unification, that would also carry a lot of burden and side effects. That is why unification of the Korean Peninsula should be pursued in a peaceful manner and a stable manner, and amid support from all the neighboring countries. That is what we believe is the best model for unification. My third point is North Korea is pursuing economic development and what we should do with it. Currently, North Korea's infrastructure is near collapse, and they are in depletion of many of their resources. So they are faced with a famine of the people and a lot of economic difficulties. In order to resolve the situation that they're currently in, what they need is support and economic aid from neighboring countries. But as you know, the current situation, because of the missile issues or nuclear testing threat, they are seeing unwillingness to follow up on the obligations that they made, the promises that they made to the international community. That is why I believe that despite the threat to the survival of the people, they need to follow the models of Vietnam or China and pursue economic reform. Thank you.
Thank you, General Lee, and I'm grateful to you that you addressed some of the other questions that had been posed. I realize that there are some questions left hanging there, questions like Nick's about economic robust activity, and it would have been nice to have had a North Korean here to address some of these questions. Every year I try to persuade the North Koreans to come, and they don't show any interest. But some of you here have relations from time to time with North Koreans, and if you feel disposed toward using your own good relations to encourage them to attend this multilateral paradiplomatic event, we would be in your debt. So maybe next year we will have a little bit revised panel if we could bring that about. But even without a North Korean, I think we had a very good panel and addressed the issue from different perspectives, not necessarily their country's government perspective in the case of Alexander. But I'd like to ask you to all join me in thanking the panelists and the participants who joined in this rich discussion.